Hello, everyone. Welcome to a very special last episode of Uncanny Treks on Filmation Star Trek for the year 2023. I am Bob in Cascadia. That is Matt in the Southland. Tonight, we are talking about the Turishan incident from the 17th of November, 1973. That is the 11th episode of the Filmation Star Trek cartoon. And then we are talking about Time Trap, the 12th episode from the 24th of November, 1973. Matt, how the hell are you doing tonight?
Pretty well, Bob. 50 years of Star Trek animation. This is not the best, but it's still pretty good.
Next year, it'll be 51 years or 50 years, depending on which season we're in. It'll vary. Matt, do you want to walk us through the plot of the Turishan incident?
The Enterprise has its Bottle City of Candor adventure, which is to say they shrink. And I want to add, Bob, they tried to make it like Gulliver's Travels and stuff.
I think the planet is not called Turishan, but I'm going to call it Turishan because why not? But the geological appearance of it from space, with its eruptions and crystals, and when Kirk is beamed down later in the episode, that was pretty cool. I enjoyed that part of the episode. Another neat thing from this episode was we have the Enterprise having both gossamer mice and halo fish, these made-up animals that are supposed to be super sensitive, that test environmental conditions.
I thought that was awesome, and I've never thought about that, but it's so sciencey. What we would do anyway, we would take these animals into space to see how they react to different things. We were sending up different animals before we sent humans. But then they start talking science, Bob. And I just don't think it's very accurate. I'm not a scientist.
You don't think the distance between atoms in the human body is the same relative distance as the distance between stars, Matt?
No, I don't think that's true.
But McCoy sounded so persuasive.
They start talking about shrinking the space between the atoms and making it smaller. I was able to go with it because it was a Saturday morning cartoon, but hopefully no kid brought that up in science class.
Yeah, this was the first appearance of DNA in the Star Trek. I don't think the original series ever got into DNA.
Please, Bob, Kirk's DNA was everywhere in the OC.
Yeah, in the spirit of this episode, like Kirk, have you ever had to measure your own shrinkage?
Nah, Bob, never had to measure my own shrinkage.
Also in this episode, we learned that the Enterprise, the 1701 Enterprise, has a Neelix. That Neelix is a woman named Brielle. Any thoughts on the Enterprise having a Neelix?
Is this a new character?
Yeah.
I'm glad they included this prototypical Neelix.
To, in a very sexist way, complain about how women's rings were falling off and they were getting hysterical. Did you catch who voiced her?
It's Michelle Barrett, right?
Nope.
Who was it?
Who else would it be if it's not Michelle Barrett?
James Doohan?
Good guess, but no. Who else would it be?
Gotta be
Nichelle Nichols. To get back to the original series, and specifically this episode, so I feel like, maybe I'm making this up, but I feel like in the past, Chekhov is usually the bloodthirsty one on the original Star Trek show. But here it's kind of funny to see Sulu play the role. He really, really wants to blow up the bottled city of Candor. He really wants to do it.
Why wouldn't you? Is it like stepping on an ant bed?
The voices of the bottled city of Candor people were so annoying, and their diction was so annoying from the script that I wouldn't have minded had they been blown up. That's certainly.
There you go. They're ants.
All right. Speaking of ants, Matt, should we go to character of the week?
No, Bob, I want to make one more point before we I'm going to give this show some credit for being very creative with the way that the transporter would put the characters back together at the correct size, because it's like the buffer knew what their DNA was supposed to do. That was actually smart. Yeah, I was watching this, I'm like, this is stupid. Then they did that, and I was like, you actually have to have half a brain to figure that one out. That's pretty good.
I saw that they were using the transporter to solve it, and then I just stopped paying attention because how many episodes of Star Trek have they used the transporter to solve it?
Maybe I'm so used to that kind of plot that when they went back to it, I was back home. The good old trick, solving everything with a transporter.
The theme of this episode is you having very thoughtful things about things you've DM'd me or things that happened on the episode, and I was just like, yeah, I didn't really pay attention to that.
Sometimes I don't think I pay attention to the episode. Apparently, I pay attention too much. You don't pay attention enough. I always thought it was the other way around.
It varies.
Our dynamic is switching. I'm getting way too up in the weeds sometimes, and you're like, that happened.
Who was your character of the week for the Turishan?
I'm giving it to the Lilliputians as a whole. The whole colony of people. The little tiny people.
I'm going to give it to Nurse Chapel. She had a lot of screen time this episode for some reason. She wanted to get that laser, and by God, she got that laser, man.
Strange New Worlds in this cartoon has shot up the rankings of Nurse Chapel. She's getting a much bigger role in everything.
It is surprising how much she is on this show, but I'm here for it. I like Nurse Chapel. Do you want to give us the plot of the Time Trap?
The Enterprise and Klingon Commander Corps Cruiser Klothos battle in the Delta Triangle, and both are lost in it among a ship graveyard.
Once they get into the Delta Triangle, we have the Sargasso Sea of old ships, as they call it. And it's a cool visual. It does remind me, and obviously this is not that close, but it does remind me of the graveyard of ships after Wolf 359.
It was more like a junkyard.
Matt doesn't care for these designs.
No, it was more like a junkyard. I did not get
Yeah.
359 vibes.
Among the junkyard of ships, we do have Scotty identify the Bonaventure, which he says is the missing first warp drive ship from Earth. That does require some creative explanation of how the Bonaventure is different from the Phoenix in the First Contact.
This was actually very interesting because I wanted to know the answer to this after you posed this question in the notes. So I went and Googled it. And the woman that's on the Elysian Council in the white uniform is possibly from the crew of that ship. And that's a Starfleet uniform, like pre-discovery.
It's an old Starfleet uniform.
Right.
I guess technically it wouldn't necessarily be a Starfleet uniform. I think the explanation would be the Phoenix was just a rocket that Zephyr Cochrane added warp drive to, whereas the Bonaventure would be a ship designed to have warp drive.
The Bonaventure has the version 2.0 of Cochrane's warp drive. The one designed for the space travel. But the Wright brothers plane didn't fly very far, but it did fly. Whereas they got a commercial plane. The first commercial flight, the first like military plane, a whole different thing.
So in the Triangle, like you mentioned, we have the Elysian Council of people stranded in the Triangle, and they say there's 123 species. Do you want to run down the list of species we see on the Elysian Council?
They say there's 123 species. They gave us 8. And guess what? We know all of them. Orion, Romulan, Klingon, Kzinti, Andorian, Xindi, Insectoid, Philosian, Aquan, Vulcan, Tellarite, Human, Gorn, and Sigian.
This is actually the first time we see a Kzinti, because they've just been mentioned before. It's not exactly the same design. Like the ears are a little weird, a little fishy, a little funny. The design that you see on Lower Decks and that you'll see in the later episode when we cover it next year, the Slaver weapon, that's a little different. The Xindi actually aren't introduced till Enterprise, but
Bob is calling them the Xindi. They're not really the Xindi.
Yeah. It makes sense to say that because the Insectoid does look a lot like the Xindi Insectoid.
I mean, the Xindi be Zorak.
They do look like Zorak too. I forget his species name, but they do look like Zorak. The Aquan appears to be a woman in a breathing helmet, although Aquans haven't shown up before. They will show up in a later episode, although that design also looks pretty different in the later episode. I don't think we've ever seen Sigians before either. That was the Oracle chick. That's 15 species. That's pretty respectable. But we get to see, maybe not all of them, but a lot of them on the Enterprise because Kirk just loves to have a banquet, Matt. He's going to have a banquet under any circumstances.
When is it not a good time to throw a banquet on a starship, Bob?
Spock would say when his dad is visiting is not a good time to have a banquet, but who cares?
When you're stranded, throw a banquet.
You got a tight deadline before you can escape this Delta Triangle. But before you escape that Delta Triangle, party down with everybody else in the Delta Triangle.
You've got to Megazord your two ships together. Did you understand that part, Bob?
No,
Why did they
not.
needed to use the power of both their ships, but they also had to be like on top of each other?
It's a well-known trope from animation that your powers have to combine.
I wish they would have done something cooler with it. You know what I mean? Because even at this time, you still had some of
to
the.
look like Captain Planet or Power Rangers.
I wanted to freaking phase them through together and make a Klingon Enterprise ship or some cool thing with wings.
We've joked before about back in the 90s, really the only episode of the animated series that was considered canon was the Yesteryear episode, the one about Spock's backstory. A neat little fact I did pick up from Memory Alpha, the name of Commander Kor, who was the first Klingon we were introduced to way back in Errand of Mercy, the original Star Trek episode. The name of his battlecruiser being the Klothos does show up in the DS9 episodes where Kor is. They mention that ship. So that was canon too.
I remember the name of that ship's rang a bell with me. For my character of the week,
Who'd you go with, Matt?
I went with McCoy, Bob. He just wanted to dance.
In the past few episodes, we've really seen McCoy's throw down his A game in terms of macking. There was him bragging about how he saved literally everybody's life on the ship multiple times.
I feel like he has his own character love machine, and I don't think that was in TOS.
No, maybe in that first episode where he meets that old flame of his who's now a salt vampire, but not for most of the show.
He's just a charming Southern doctor.
He is. He went to Ole Miss like me. I'll go for the character of the week for me, the Orion woman. It's pretty amusing to hear Nichelle Nichols voice an Orion woman, so I'll give it to her.
And Bob, what was with the Orion woman? Why do they have to dress her like that? We don't see that kind of thing in Lower Decks.
That feels like a trap, so I'm not going to answer it.
It is a trap.
You got to get up pretty early in the morning to cancel old Bob, Matt. He's not just going to be easily canceled. We'll do a recap of the whole Filmation Star Trek show next year. The plan is we'll cover Lower Decks Season 5 when it drops, and then we'll cover the end of Filmation Star Trek Season 1 as well as Star Trek Season 2. But since that's a year or so away, I thought we could do like a little mini check-in here. Matt, we've seen 12 Filmation Star Trek episodes. 9 are original, more or less, and then we had 3 sequel episodes. Do you want to tell the people what the 3 episodes we've had are?
The 3 episodes are More Tribbles, More Troubles, Once Upon a Planet, and Mud's Passion.
Matt, between the 9 original ones and then those 3 sequels, do you generally prefer the originals or do you prefer the sequels?
I'm leaning towards the originals. The whole sequels never do as well as the original. That's a rule.
The originals do a good job of doing very original series style ideas that they may not have been easily able to do for budget reasons in the original series. So that's cool. It builds out the world a little more. The Harry Mudd episodes are not so great that I feel that disappointed by the sequels, right?
Yeah.
But especially Trouble with Tribbles, one of the all-time great Star Trek episodes. The sequel, More Tribbles, More Troubles, pretty underwhelming. The biggest trouble.
What more could you ask for?
Of those original episodes, Matt, what's your favorite episode so far?
All right, Bob, this might be a little controversial, but it's the Magics of Meganus 2.
You know, I once listened to an episode of another Star Trek podcast about the animated series where the co-host argued that was one of the greatest TV episodes of all time. It was on par with the Sopranos finale, the Twin Peaks: The Return finale.
I don't feel that way. My opinion is not that strong on this episode, but I imagine it's what an acid trip would feel like.
I tried my theory that Matt likes it because he thinks it's one of the greatest episodes of TV ever made. Let me try a different tack. You like it because you love the devil. You're a Satanist, Matt.
No, Bob, I'm not a Satanist. I do like that they have incorporated this religious stuff into it to try to explain it with space aliens. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, to have the devil be a sympathetic character for babies on a Saturday morning cartoon.
Yeah, you're right, Bob. That is why I like it.
Hail Satan.
That's why. Magic's Omegas 2. It's a great episode, Bob. If I was going to make someone watch the show and watch one episode, it would be this one just because of how batshit crazy it is.
It is a pretty good representative of the insanity of the show.
If you think this is hilarious and you don't mind watching and you can get into it, you'll probably enjoy the rest of these episodes.
I am going to think about the three-handed stockade for Eric's for the rest of my life. That's just in my brain for some reason.
And that's when it goes off the rails, too. When it switches to that trial piece, you're like, what the hell just happened?
When it becomes Gene Roddenberry's The Crucible.
It just adds to the insanity of it. All right, Bob, what was your favorite episode?
I already talked about this on a prior episode, but the episode The Survivor with the Vendorian shapeshifter, mainly because of childhood nostalgia for the novelization, which I dearly loved as a kid. I remember reading it at church instead of going to a church service. Also, the recent excellent way Lower Decks used the Vendorians in the Caves episode also increases my affection for Survivor.
I enjoy that episode as well, too. Great episode. And the introduction of the Vendorians and seeing them in Lower Decks, that was cool.
That was a really good example of timing for our podcast. So Matt, what's your least favorite episode?
Bob, I was expecting More Tribbles, More Troubles to be more memorable, but it was not.
My least favorite would be Yesteryear. It's the most important canonically, but it's the least entertaining. Granted, they made the right call, and they didn't put young Spock and his pet Shayala onto the show as regulars, but just the threat that they might have was a horrifying threat, you know?
Little Spock's voice was terrible. Jimmy Doohan needed to get up on that and get some more money.
Jimmy Doohan to do that. This isn't a favorite or a least favorite, but I will just throw out, I was shocked at how much better Infinite Vulcan was than I remembered it.
That was a fun episode. I enjoyed that one.
Who's your favorite character of Filmation Trek thus far, Matt?
Bob, Spock is owning this cartoon.
That's true. I mean, we got to see him at giant size, Matt. What more could you ask for?
You've seen Spock. Spock's everywhere now.
I'm going to give it to Eric's, and there's literally nothing to the character, but I like him.
My least favorite character is Maress. For that one episode where she purred after everything she said.
You're just very afraid of becoming a furry, Matt, and you resent Maress.
No, it freaked me out. That episode ruined the character for me, Bob.
To change the subject to spare Matt, I will say I was unexcited about the return and the execution of the return of Cyrano Jones. Even though Trouble with Tribbles is a great episode, Cyrano Jones, not a great character.
That was random. After retroactively thinking back to this, Harry Mudd in the last episode we reviewed, not my favorite either.
That's why we need to remake that episode with Rainn Wilson, baby.
Exactly. It could be okay if it was live action, maybe, and we had decent actors and a better script.
Basically, if everything was different.
We're just saying bring back Harry, but do it differently.
Matt, any surprises about the first half of Filmation Star Trek?
These aren't as bad as I originally thought they were going to be, looking at stills of the animation that I'd seen in the past. If you can get past the shoddy animation, there was some thought actually put into these. I thought these were going to be disposable garbage. You know, just like kind of like when we did our other podcast, when we did X-Men 92 versus Young Justice, we started off reviewing some of those 60s cartoons.
The 60s Teen Titans cartoons.
I was thinking it was going to be that, and that I didn't want to watch 2 seasons of. Because that was shoddy animation that they just threw on the TV.
The animation of Filmation Star Trek is worse than Pride of the X-Men, but I have to say the writing is much better.
The writing is way better. And I'm referring to those really shoddy cartoons of the 60s and 70s.
The thing that surprises me at this point is that I'd read the novelizations of some of these as a kid, but I didn't actually see them till they were on Netflix in the 2010s, and I'm surprised how much I'd forgotten about some of them, especially because I saw Infinite Vulcan and Once Upon a Planet 8 years ago or so, and I had forgotten a lot of it, although I think I was grading while I was watching these back then.
Bob, you can't just have these awesome things on in the background. You have to pay full attention.
So this has been Uncanny Treks, wrapping up our coverage of Filmation Star Trek for 2023. We'll be back on it in 2024 when Lower Decks returns. Join us for our ongoing coverage of comics. We'll get back on that X-Men 92 versus Young Justice kick very soon. We'll hope you'll be there for that. Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks for listening.